Okay, we'll begin our work session. We're meeting in work session to discuss our FY 2019 draft general fund operating budget. This is the third work session we've had on this budget. And we've held a public hearing. We've heard from the Budget Advisory Review Committee. And this is our opportunity to decide on any changes that we want to make as a result of what we heard at the public hearing or what we heard from the Budget Advisory Review Committee before we approve our budget at our business meeting later this evening. So we'll just begin the discussion. Dr. Michael, was there anything that you wanted to say before
Yeah, I don't know
we
if there's
start
anything
with the
specific
discussion?
I want to say, but certainly now we've had several different opportunities to look at the budget. If there's any questions that have come up or any questions that have come up as a result of the presentation of the data to the county commissioners, we'd be glad to follow up on those either today, or if there's a topic of interest, we certainly could follow up on it at a business meeting separate of the budget process. Again, I think the details of the budget are pretty clear when you go through the pages and the page reference numbers and things, but we'd be glad to answer any questions or take any additional suggestions the board members might have.
This is very specific and probably a small portion of the budget, but just with the closing of Garden View hotels and the city signaling that they may take similar action with other hotels that I may or may not house some of our student population. Could you bring us up to speed on how that would impact any of our budget and what services we provide to those students?
So one of the slides we shared earlier today with the county commissioners was students in transition. So that includes our homeless students, includes foster care students, it includes students that for one reason or another, sometimes even issues of separation of the family, things like that, you get labeled as a student in transition. This is a federal law. We're monitored by the state to comply with federal law. So the big change for a group like that's at the hotel that's been mentioned, when they move to another location, a big expense for us will be to try to continue to enroll them in the current school that they're enrolled. So let's say they attend Boonesboro Elementary, even though they might be in Hagerstown right now, at some point they were in Boonesboro Elementary before they became homeless or were identified as a student in transition. We might be transporting that child already from Hagerstown to Boonesboro. If that child now relocates from the hotel that they're in to the west end of Hagerstown or even to Clear Spring, if at all possible, our obligation is to try to still keep that child in Boonesboro Elementary School. So that's where we pick up a substantial expense. The concept from the federal government is to avoid additional disruption for the child by keeping their schooling the same, their teachers the same, that type of thing. So in the spirit of the law, we certainly support. At some point, it becomes a challenge when we see children riding a bus for an hour and a half because we don't have direct bus services from out-of-district areas. So sometimes a child will change buses 2 or 3 times in order to stay in their location. We do work with parents and encourage them to think about how long they might be in their new location. If it's going to be for a long period of time, we try to talk to them about they might want to consider going to the local school because the child would start to learn friends and other people in the community if they were connected to their local school. At the same time, sometimes we have people that are going to move back into the area which they transitioned out of, and they're trying to maintain friendship and things there. So it's a federal law. Our big expense, one of our expenses, is certainly transportation, and we do have many, many children involved in this that we're providing special transportation for. The other expenses often that brings trauma and other challenges to the students, so it might bring a lack of continuity to them doing homework or some other emotional challenges and things we might have to address as a result of becoming homeless.
All right, thank you.
What's our contingency plan? contingency ideas in case the extra funding doesn't come through from the county?
Well, I think at this point, we've started to look at a few things. I don't want to start rumors ahead of things, but we're continuously looking at staff. We obviously want to continue. This budget did not address all the needs that we have in the system by far. I think as you look at, as we're analyzing the kindergarten readiness data, we're seeing the need to have not only pre-K, but all-day pre-K, and not only for low-income children, but for the majority of our population of Washington County. There's not a significant difference. I don't want to start quoting numbers and have them wrong, but it's like 31% of our poverty children aren't kindergarten ready or are kindergarten ready, but only 41% of our population that's non-farm, non-free and reduced meals are kindergarten ready. So 6 out of 10 students that are coming from middle-class families in Washington County aren't ready for kindergarten. I can only speculate why that might be. I think some of our families are just above that free and reduced meal rate. So maybe some of those influences that often come with poverty are associated with some of our families. I also think for a lot of our folks that travel down the road, mom or dad or both, that might be going down the road. When I go to Annapolis, I generally try to leave my house right at 5:30 and try to get ahead of the traffic. But going up the mountain, it is 3 solid lanes of heavy traffic going up South Mountain before traffic starts to disperse between Baltimore and Washington and Frederick area. So a lot of our communities traveling up and down the road to provide for their family. So I think by the time they leave that early, get back in the evening, sports, other community activities, church, get the children fed, get them in bed, how much time is there to read and to work with their child and things like that. So I don't know why that is, but our delta between our farm rate and our non-farm rate students is not as wide as it is for the state averages. Not by far, it's fairly close compared to the state averages. We'll share some of this during the board meeting. I think it's on February 27th.
Bring that presentation.
Absolutely. Right.
Public will probably like to see it. I know I've seen it.
Right. There's 4 areas, and we'll go through the 4 areas. It's motor skills, it's social skills, it's got a math section and a reading section. But when we say that, it's not even adding 1 + 1. It's nothing like that. It's being able to count to 20. It's recognizing that this is a pile of 3 pencils without counting 1, 2, 3. It's recognizing that there's more objects on this side than that side. It's recognizing that there's words on the page. There's a front and back to the book, those kind of things. So some of it can be a little bit challenging, but it's not things that if children have had regular exposure to things that they don't understand. So we'll absolutely cover that. Back to your question, Mr. Stafford, what will we do to close the gap? I don't want to jump ahead of myself. I'm concerned about this year's budget gap of $1 million, but I'm more concerned already about next year's budget. It'd be foolish for me not to start thinking 2 and 3 years ahead. I think this year, certainly appreciative of the governor's influx of money to the capital or to the general fund budget for education. Will that happen again next year when it's not an election year? We picked up some money as a result of our EL student population from the state, but again, that comes with additional challenges, so we got kind of the trade-off of that. We did drop about $800,000 in our farm rate money, so we lost about $800,000. Had our farm rate remained about the same, we'd have picked up almost $800,000 additional out of that. So while we want our farm rate to decline, our free and reduced meal rate to decline, as people get work, we're optimistic and we want people to have work. We want them to come off of the free and reduced meal rolls. If that happens again next year, it'll be another loss of money to our general fund. And next year, we're going to bring our projections to the board, I think, in the first meeting in May. It might be the first meeting in April. We're projecting for next year, we're actually going to decline. So for the first year in a number of years, we've had a couple ups and downs, but next year we could decline in enrollment, which means the money coming from the county could be less next year than this year. Now, per student, it'll have to be the same amount, but a net decrease in students could be less money to the general fund next year as an obligation of maintenance of effort. I'd like to hope that our county will not be identified as a low-effort county in one way. And if they add to maintenance of effort, they might get off that list, but that would be $1.3 million that we couldn't expect in increased revenue. The $1.3 million in the budget this year becomes ongoing part of maintenance of effort, so it will come forward in future budgets, but it won't be an addition. I think we can already anticipate if we give our 3 employee groups just steps, which at this point are all 2.5%, would be what the step would be. And if we just assume a modest increase in healthcare costs, again, of about 5%, without changing anything else, without any other additions to our budget, a year away, I'm talking. I know I'm ahead of myself, but I have to do future planning. We will need $6 million right off the bat next year if we were to give a raise, a step, just a step, and if we were to cover 5% in healthcare. So some of the things I'm going to be doing and working with staff throughout the year, we're just going to look for little opportunities here and there of how we might do things differently. Already we're starting to post IA positions that normally we posted at 7 hours. We're posting those at 6.5 hours. So it's only a half an hour, but a half an hour at a time, it slowly adds up. It may be necessary at some point, I don't know whether it be in the coming year or coming years, that we'd have to look at that across the board. We've started looking at custodial services. Might we offer those differently across the county? All these are significant changes to the way we do business right now, and I'd like to avoid those. We will continue to evaluate each position in the budget, particularly as it comes open, things like that, seek opportunities to either expand PreK, address additional needs in the budget. If we suddenly see next year we come and we have more children, English language learners than we had even this year, we might have to look for ways to redeploy money in the budget. So our budget effort is going to be a continuous effort at this point. We've been through the budget very carefully. We've cut non-position things at this point, but going forward, we're going to be evaluating every position going forward.
In your projections, and I know it's hard to tell, but we do have the Kerwin Commission coming out with recommendations at some point. What are your thoughts on that looking ahead? Is there any realistic reason to be optimistic?
I think as I understand the Kerwin Commission recommendation to this point, we'd fully support, obviously, all day pre-K for everybody. I mean, if they would do that and that would come as part of the state funding formula, that'd be beneficial to us, even as we pre-funded our own program because of state money. If they'd just allow us to count those kids, those children right now, that'd be a windfall to us because we're already paying for them. If they suddenly became part of the formula, we'd get money to pay for the teachers and the IAs and the program, so that would be a great thing. I mean, I'm hearing numbers like to implement the Kerwin Commission would be $2 billion. I think currently the state budget's $6.5 billion towards education, so it'd be about a 25% increase, so it'd be, or maybe even a 33% increase, I guess it'd be $2 billion, give or take a little bit. It'd be substantial, but, I don't know what that means, how likely that is, how it'll phase in, whether there'll be any pre-legislation this year to make any of that happen or not. I think the Senate and the House can reduce the governor's budget at this point, but they can't add to the governor's budget. So I don't think we can expect any other changes this year, potentially, other than reductions for the current budget.
Dr. I'm sorry. No, I was just thinking, along with our full-day pre-Ks in the Title I schools, is there anything that our family liaisons can do within the community to help with kindergarten readiness?
Absolutely. We're working with, and Stacy Henson works with our family liaisons. We work with any number of child care providers. We're working with other nursery school programs, Head Start. Matter of fact, I have a meeting coming up with Mr. Pittman very soon regarding Head Start within the next week or so. So we're working with a variety of agencies trying to reach out. Working with On Track, they've helped us print a little booklet that's available in particularly pediatricians' offices and things like that. We're working with groups to provide even the article in the paper today about the little schoolhouses, the little library things. I mean, that's a community initiative to try to get books out in the community. We do have a $1 million grant that we'll be bringing forward to the board. It's a literacy grant that Laura Hanks and Dr. Pugh and their team are working on. Very, very interesting grant. We're very optimistic about that. Part of that grant will be to provide books in homes. One thing we know about One thing some research indicates is from many of our low-income homes, there's less than 10 books in the home total. So we're looking for a child to have 1,000 books read to them by the time they come to kindergarten. That's difficult to do if your home only has 10 books. So we'd be looking for opportunities to expand that, encourage people to use resources at the school, resources in the community, resources at church, other agencies. So we're partnering with a lot of people to try to spread the word, not only what kindergarten readiness is, but how you can help your child. And if you do nothing else, my encouragement to the public would be read, read, and read. Certainly talk about numbers, count with your child, count objects, work on shapes, work on colors, just some typical things like that. That wouldn't necessarily guarantee your child being kindergarten ready, but it'd be helpful. Other areas back to kindergarten readiness are just social skills, following two-step directions, getting along with your neighbor, following some basic directions and things like that. And then some physical things they have to do just to demonstrate their physical capability. But yes, we need to partner with each little piece of what our organization is, Title I, and outside community agencies. That's why kindergarten readiness to me is, it is a school issue, but it's really a community issue as well. Ms. Fisher?
Ms. Murray had an article from Feedback. I had read it about kindergarten. Did you see it?
One indicating the parents need to take care of things. Is that what we're talking about? I don't know.
I was just thinking, based on that, could we get an article put in the paper explaining what happens in kindergarten, why it's so vital, why this, as well as the interaction of parents and children before they get to kindergarten?
Sure, I'd be glad to either write one, or we can write one on behalf of the board if the board would want to submit an article.
And the other thing is, if worse comes to be next year for the budget, facing a $6 million about extracurriculars.
Well, again, I don't want to jump too far ahead on the budget or create any panic, but like I say, as we go forward each month, I'm going to be looking for opportunities to be preparing for next year's budget. We might do some short-term things, even if we start additional pre-Ks. I'm not talking about the ones that are in the budget, but if I can find little bits of money here and there, and I can start additional pre-Ks by the fall, or do what we did just last week where we started the little hubs program, or the week before we started the 4 pre-Ks. If we can only get pre-K for half a year or 3/4 of a year, and then it needs to be cut the next year, it's better for that group of children than if they didn't have it at all. So throughout the year, I'm just going to continue to look for opportunities and be optimistic that the state will come through with more money again, that will be on the rebound maybe with increase in enrollment, and that the county will come through with additional resources again a year out. I'm optimistic this year. Again, we made a very conservative ask, and again, I was planning on out. I didn't want to create a budget we couldn't sustain. But I do want the board to be aware steps, and if we have a 5% increase, talking a year away, that's $6 million right off the bat before we do anything else to address needs. I think I'm correct on that, David and Eric, roughly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Michael, you've mentioned looking at positions for next year. Mrs. Fisher has just mentioned extracurriculars. At what point do we start considering programs, and what are we doing in terms of evaluating programs to see if existing programs are doing what it is that we want them to do, if any can be reduced, eliminated? What's the plan there with programming?
Well, a big part of our $2.2 million reduction in the budget, we did look at any number of programs. Some of those were even services or contractual services that were offered to us. We had a research company we were paying about $50,000 a year to for various research projects. They did an excellent job, but we've determined that we can do those types of things in-house. We did have a technology-based program. I believe it was $300,000 or $400,000. As we reviewed the nature of what that program provided, we discovered that there were apps and things available to us for free that teachers were describing to me were better aligned with the PreK effort, and even for just reinforcing basic mathematics skills in elementary. So we were able to reduce some things like that. Dr. Pugh is running research on a variety of programs that we have, and we have a piece of software that we're using to try to analyze children that were involved in various programs. So we're already looking at opportunities like that and trying to pick those programs that we believe are working and are adding value, and those programs that aren't. So part of our 2.2 million, I'd say probably 500, 600, 700,000 of that were various programs, contractual services, things like that that we reduced in this year's budget. We'll continue to look at that and make sure we're not, continuing to support something that's not contributing to student learning.
Thank you.
The only other thing I would add is just many of us were in Annapolis for the day in Annapolis, and I haven't seen the latest, but it appears we have to keep that $250,000 in there to pay for sick leave benefits.
Yeah, so far the sick leave bill, there's been legislation introduced on one side, House or Senate, to delay the implementation until July 1st. But even if they delay it, the 109 days that start the clock, we would just have to do it next year. I mean, our only anticipation is that we need to have any money available for this year. I need to understand the 109 days, whether it's calendar days or work days. And I think it's one of the things we still need to do a little research on. But right now, what I heard, I think you were in the room when I think it was Speaker Bush mentioned their fear of opening it up for changes would be there to be changes. So I think that's a hesitation. That right. And we're still exploring. I think we're going to seek an Attorney General's opinion on some various groups, whether it represents all these various groups, just to be sure that we're not offering services to people who wouldn't have to.
I've also heard conflicting information about the 106 days, whether that's 106 days from the time that the law begins, which is, next week, or if that's from the time that the employee was hired. So we might have a problem there.
Yeah. No matter what, we're still going to have to devote staff resources to tracking.
It's going to be very complicated to track.
Yes.
And you've got some people who are eligible and some who aren't, and that may change throughout the year, and it's going to be very difficult to track that.
I think would add some challenges. We have various groups of staff that may qualify for leave under the bill. Some are paid on a per diem rate, like our on-call substitutes are on a per diem rate. Others are paid on an hourly rate, like let's say an on-call custodial sub or food service sub. And so they're all tracked differently. Some have standard hours, some do not. So it's a little convoluted how we're going to track it and assure that we're compliant, which is our desire, of course, is to be compliant with the law. But it is going to take additional resources.
Again, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves on additional changes that will occur throughout the year, but we'll keep the board posted on those types of things. Some of them are going to be driven by how do we stay under 20 hours in a 2-week period to avoid the cost of additional sick leave. So we have some thoughts on that if that all comes together. Tonight's presentation of the budget will just be, Jeff will probably just come to the table, make mention of the total amount of money that the general fund requested the board, and then just, you certainly could ask any additional questions, but at that point, we'd be anticipating the approval of the draft budget as presented. And that would be your adopted budget. Then certainly we have to wait for what comes out from the county commissioners. They didn't say today, but I would hope within the month they'll start having a draft budget of their own. I think we'll have a pretty good indication of what point we're going to be funded. During our next joint session, which I think is February 27th, we will talk about our CIP. Our CIP request for this upcoming year will include Sharpsburg, the Urban Improvement Project, the BOE component, our building next to Barbara Ingram. We call it a variety of things. And then we have 2 systemic requests for FY19. We have 2 roof projects. Right now, they have not been funded at the state level. If they are funded at the state level, we need to hope that our county commissioners will fund the local match of those. Right now, the local match for Sharpsburg and for the UIP appear to be funded by the county, as well as a contribution from the Board of Education for the UIP building. We will need to address long-term, what we call systemic project, our roof boiler chiller projects. We have 3.5 million square feet or more at this point under roof, and you have to keep up on that, just like keeping your house painted, your roof in good shape, your boiler, your chiller, those kind of things at home. It's the same thing, just on a much larger scale, and we need to continue to invest in that for the long term so that we don't build a deferred maintenance issue for future superintendents, future boards, future staff members. So.
There's nothing further. Nothing further? All right, then we'll stand adjourned and meet in closed session at 3:30.